Abner T Campbell was born on February 5, 1817, and lived in Londonderry, Vermont. During this time period, children attended one-room schoolhouses, in which the age could vary from 6 to 13. Parents owned farms, which they would help him. Life was simple. Cars and complex machinery and inventions did not exist in the early 1800s. When Abner grew up and moved away, he worked on his own farm. This was a common occupation for many men during the Civil War. Working on farms could be an incredibly strenuous job. Complex machinery that we have today did not exist during the Civil War era. Before enlisting into the Army, Abner married Anna B. Farnham. The two had 4 children together: Anne Janet, who was born on December 20th, 1839, Henry LaRose, who was born on February 22nd, 1842, Edward Ramonzo, who was born on January 29th, 1844, and Washington Ormondo, who was born on June 29th, 1846. Washington Ormondo died when he was merely 8 years old. Henry was Abner's oldest son. He was born in 1842. He joined the war when he was 20. Henry was a private and enlisted into the 11th Infantry on December 31st, 1861. Later, on December 31st, 1863, he was moved to the 2nd USSS. He left the war in the 4th Vermont Infantry on July 13th, 1865, during the end of the Civil War. Thankfully, Henry lived through the war. He was not killed in battle. When Henry was not in the war, he worked as a farmer. He was 6'1" and had blue eyes and dark hair. Abner's second son was Edward. He was mustered into the Civil War when he was only 18. Like his brother, Edward was a private in the 11th Vermont Infantry and was mustered out of the war on May 13, 1865. Edward lived through the war. He was not killed in battle. Part of the battle burial detail was he personally witnessed President Lincoln dedicate the Battleground National Cemetery, where he is now buried. After the war, he stayed in the Army and in Washington, working for the War Department. He lived in Tacoma Park, and less than 2 miles from both Fort Stevens and the cemetery. He retired at the rank of a major. Abner and his wife, Anna, had 2 more children in addition to Edward and Henry. Their names were Anne and Washington. Washington was born on June 29, 1846. Unfortunately, Washington died on March 28, 1855, when he was only 8. Like Washington, Anna did not live a very long life. Anne died on August 25, 1865, when she was only 25 years old. Both Washington and Anne are buried next to their parents in the Rest Haven Cemetery in Londonderry, Vermont. After Abner married and had 4 children, he enlisted into the war at the rather late age of 47 on November 30th, 1863. This was after both of his sons enlisted. He was enlisted into the 1st Regiment in the 11th Infantry and fought in the 1st Artillery Unit. For many soldiers, days were long and hot, especially if you were stationed in the South. Despite many assumptions, soldiers did little fighting compared to the time they spent on guard, patiently waiting. In H. Barlow's diary, he writes, "Revelry at 5:30 a.m., breakfast at 7, company drills from 9 till 11, V from 2 till 4, supper at 5, dress parade at 6, tattoo at 9, taps at 9:10. This was a typical day for a soldier during the Civil War. Abner wasn't in battle every day, or even daily. Many soldiers were watching guard for several hours or doing long drills. Despite the hard work, for most men, the long days were worth it. Many hated the rebels. Henry L. Terry writes, "Rebels, but they run like devils. I hope we shall go where we can have a fight."
This is an overview of where Abner went during the war.
Abner's regiment traveled to many places. Their first expedition was to Galveston, Texas, on December 26, 1862. The regiment departed Galveston on January 3, 1863. In Galveston, a battle occurred on January 1, 1863. Then, Abner traveled to New Orleans until March. After New Orleans, there was an expedition to Port Hudson, Louisiana, on March 7th through the 20th. They were then at Baton Rouge until May. An advance occurred on Port Hudson, May 18th through the 24th. There was action at Plain Store on May 21st. The regiment then fought in the siege of Port Hudson, May 24th through July 9th. And then assaults on Port Hudson, May 27th and June 14th. Finally, the Confederates surrendered the Battle of Port Hudson on July 9th in Jackson, Louisiana. The total death of Abner's, Henry's, and Edward's regiment was 1 man was killed in action, and 53 men died by disease. Of course, Abner was only there for a fraction of those battles because he joined the 11th Infantry on November 30th. A battle that Abner may have fought in was Mine Run. This was close to Fredericksburg, Virginia. The battle took place from November 27th to December 2nd, 1863. In late November 1863, Meade made an attempt to steal a march through the wilderness and to strike the right flank of the Confederate armies south of the Rapidan River. The Union was attacked twice and eventually lost. The Confederate was too strong. Despite the losses that Abner had to suffer, the Union claimed several victories throughout the Civil War. One famous victory was the Siege of Port Hudson. This battle took place 4 months before Abner joined the war. However, both of his sons fought in the Siege of Port Hudson. Port Hudson is said to be one of the longest sieges in American military history. It took place for 48 days in 1863. The Confederate troops were trying to defend a fort that stood above the Mississippi River. Cannon shots and rifle fires were relentless during this battle. Eventually, the South was defeated. Now, the Union had full monopoly over the Mississippi River. This battle was exhausting, and it is likely that both Henry and Edward fought here, just months before Abner joined the war. Even though fighting could be a scary and exhausting task, the families that soldiers left behind were also struggling. Children were expected to do a large amount of work at their farm. Even at the young age of 3, everyone was expected to help. Anna and her daughter Anne were at home together, without any help from Henry, Edward, or Abner. Without the men, life on the farm must have been exhausting. Anna and Anne struggled for life during these bleak years that the 3 men had left. Not only was it difficult to live without a father at home, but many families were struggling in order to earn money. Life at Abner's home must have been especially difficult after his son Washington died when he was only 8. His family must have been deeply saddened, making labor difficult. I can imagine what a strain this left on Abner's family, and then leaving to Londonderry to join the war. However, I can't find any sources or documents to prove my inference. In the winter of 1864, Abner fell sick with typhoid pneumonia. This disease causes the lungs to become inflamed. In some cases, victims die after 3 to 4 hours of noticing the slightest of cold symptoms. This could be treated by having leeches suck the blood of a patient. Typhoid pneumonia was not uncommon during the Civil War. About half the deaths from the disease during the Civil War were from typhoid fever, a complication of typhoid pneumonia. In addition to this, 53 men died in Abner's regiment due to disease, most likely because of typhoid pneumonia. This is because of the harsh and unmanageable conditions that soldiers were forced to live in. Tents were not sanitary, and since several men had to live in a small space, disease spread quickly and easily. Despite Abner's hope to come home alive to his family, this did not happen. Abner died at Fort Slocum on February 15, 1864, due to typhoid pneumonia. After hearing the news of Abner's death, his wife and 3 children were deeply saddened. Edward, Abner's son, continued to fight in the war and lived through it. He died on March 12, 1936. He is now buried in the Battleground National Cemetery in Washington, D.C. Abner's second son, Henry, also continued to fight and made it through the war and died on December 22, 1919. Henry is buried in East Foxborough. Abner's wife, Anna B. Farnham, remarried twice after Abner's death, Solon Thompson and W. M. Thompson. These two could have been brothers. Anna died on January 15, 1895, at the old age of 75. She is buried in the Rest Haven Cemetery next to Abner. After hearing Abner's story, I know that the Civil War was a difficult time period, not only for soldiers during the war, but for their family. This leaves me wondering, what was Abner's relationship with his family? After all, his youngest child died when he was only 8. After Abner died, his wife remarried twice. I can infer that after Washington died, his relationship with his family was strained. Also, after Abner's death, his wife immediately remarried. I can conclude that after his son died and then joining the war, his relationship with his family was devastated.